Hello people of the internet, it is Eclipse, and welcome back to Melting Skies, Chapter 8. Let's dive on in. For the past few weeks, Lavari had been watching the slow decay of her pack. Minnow was never the curse, she knew that, but she couldn't ever voice it. If her muteness hadn't been from her own volition, it would have been from the will of the pack. As she sat there, nursing her second litter, numbly watching as wolves paced to and fro, worried about everything and nothing, she suddenly felt a pull. It was a kind she had never felt before, and yet somehow she knew what it meant. She almost cried in happiness at the realization. She'd finally be able to be free. Lavari had been a troubled creature since birth. As a puppy, she could hear voices strangely familiar, calling her name and trying to give her advice. It was always overwhelming. And she never wanted to leave the den, but she had two sisters, Hersha and Tila, who always encouraged her to leave the den and play with them. One day, the voices were notably more bothersome than usual, when Tila had asked her to go on a super secret mission. Lavari and Tila had run as fast and as far as they could, so Hersha and her parents were none the wiser. The mission? Find the voices. Lavari had tried to express her discomfort early on as a puppy, but no one ever took her seriously, not even her own family. Tila was the only one who ever seemed to believe her. So that day, when they had run to find who was plaguing Lavari's poor sensitive mind, they had found the river that ran through the far side of the territory. Lavari could still hear the voices, but couldn't hear what they were saying. They had to be on the other side of that river. As soon as Lavari said as much, Tila didn't even hesitate. She leapt with the grace of an elk as wind glided through her fur. Lavari could never forget her bright blue eyes, blazing with enough confidence to rival an alpha as she fell into the silently swift waters, never to resurface. After that, her parents wouldn't let her leave the den anymore, and the voices grew louder as she stayed in one place with the shrieking of nothing to do. Hersha wouldn't talk to her then. She knew she blamed her for what happened to Tila, but also blamed her as the reason why their mother wouldn't let them leave the nursery whatsoever. For many moons, the voices slowly drove her insane. The voices screamed to do everything and nothing, that what was currently happening wasn't supposed to be happening and that she needed to change it somehow, but she was unable to. Lavari's alpha, an older one, had to essentially wrestle with her mother in order to let them become trainees. But then it got worse. The voices did become fainter as she explored the forest and learned to hunt and fight, fulfilling their wishes and demands to silence them. However, she started feeling pain all over her body whenever she executed a hunt. Regardless of the creature, she felt her own life momentarily leave her body. Then, when she returned moments after the kill, one of the distant voices would scream at her for killing their son or daughter. Whenever she fought, it was worse. Training to fight and facing off against her sister, she felt every blow she inflicted to Hersha and to anyone else. She was forced to hunt and fight through the winter as a trainee, crying every night from the pain and the distant shouting of grieving souls. The more she asked for help, the louder and more painful it became, especially when her sister essentially called her crazy and stopped talking to her altogether. One night, two voices joined the choir of madness as Lavari mourned her parents. They had refused to eat to help the others during winter, and both fell to sickness and starvation. She hated her parents for keeping her trapped, but still loved them, and the grief of losing them felt like tearing open barely healed wounds with sharp rocks and brambles. She could hear them, all of them, Her parents, her distant ancestors, the ancestors of her prey, the very grass she walked upon, and Tila. She couldn't take it anymore. In a moment of frantic desperation, Lavari ran to the river. She couldn't live like this anymore. The voices, the pain, nobody believing her. Why was she here? Why was she suffering like this? What was the point? She dove into the river, her only escape. As the quick current carried her downstream and pulled her under, she felt the voices go quiet. And it was fucking terrifying. Now, all she could hear was the water in her ears, her heart pounding in her chest, and the bubbles of air fleeing her mouth as her body started taking in water. This was it. This was the end. She would never figure out why she was here, why anyone was here. She would fade into almost peaceful oblivion as her pack breathed this sigh of relief of having to be spared from the historical lunatic. This was it. In a sudden flash, fangs and the feeling of air entering her lungs surprised Lavari as brown and cream fur surrounded her. Its warmth feeling like something she had never felt before. Her sister's embrace, dry and warm, safe and soft. The look in her pale amber eyes. It was a look she had never seen before. That day, they had talked about everything as Lavari coughed the water out and dried her fur in the sun. Hersha didn't necessarily believe everything she said, but what was important was that she cared for her and didn't want her to leave. That day, they had come up with the idea to be queens. Lavari couldn't stand being out in the forest and creating new life might offset the utter loss she felt all the time. Hersha didn't want to fight and didn't want to be separate from her sister again. So they had both become queens, being cared for and watching each other's backs through more rough suitors. Whenever a male wanted to mate with either one of them, it would have to be okayed by the other for their safety and gave them some form of choice, and their old alpha supported this rule as long as they still produced. Lavari lived peacefully like this for several moons before an unexpected den mate joined her and her sister. Before Lavari had gotten pregnant with her first litter, she had felt a pull towards Noxima, who was a temporary queen. Lavari and the dark-furred hunter never really got along. Noxima was blunt, rude, and looked down upon Lavari and her sister for eating and lounging around without contributing anything but a couple pups per season. Lavari found it strange how she kept wanting to touch Noxima, to feel the life inside of her. She had never had this reaction before to any queen, and the more she resisted the urge, the stronger it became. As Noxima's belly grew round and taut, Lavari had a revelation. She wasn't just born with this curse embedded in her soul. It had been given to her before she was born, and now it was her turn to pass along the curse. She tried to resist, she tried to ignore it, but the day before Noxima was due to give birth, Lavari succumbed to what was supposed to happen. It felt like a boulder being lifted off her shoulders as her paw glided along Noxima's belly fur. The life inside would be resilient, strong. Surely they'd be able to take the curse and make the most out of it. Lavari regretted her decision the moment she learned Minna was blind. The poor child had enough to deal with, and she had gone and made it worse for her. That was the real reason she apologized to her that day. The day she had lost her sister and Minnow had lost her mother. Her real mother, not the sad excuse of an elite hunter that was too good for her. As Minnow grew and fought her way through life, Lavari's energy started to drain. It's almost as if Minnow took her strength from Lavari's curse. The more independent she became, the less Lavari felt the need to speak her mind and defend her. And the less she spoke, the more her curse left her alone, especially Hersha's voice, crying to her that she had failed her children by leaving them too soon. The day Minnow was beat by her brother in front of the whole pack, There was nothing Lavari could do to silence the wails of agony coming from her sister's soul. When Minnow finally left, Lavari felt nothing but happiness for her. She was going to be free now. Yes, that's what was meant to happen. Unfortunately, the voices and pain returned after she left. But it was a price the queen was willing to pay for the peace of the creature she had burdened. Minnow would be able to fix the story, make it happen the way it was supposed to. Sadly, Lavari couldn't anymore, as much as the voices screamed that she act upon their demands. She had done enough for them, and now she wouldn't have to do it anymore. A howl of agony drew Lavari back to the present. She hadn't even realized her son had walked into her den.
Mom, why didn't you make her stay?
He screamed through sobs, his bright blue eyes, the same as Tila's, pouring out tears similarly to a tree leaking sap. She had never felt such disdain for those eyes as she did now. Rigian had been doing this stunt every day since Minnow fled to greener pastures. He would run patrols and laugh with the top-ranking hunters and fighters as if he was fine. But as soon as everyone settled into an afternoon nap, he would demand explanations, predictions, and even apologies out of his mother. Lavari's expression hardened into that of an almighty judge as she stared her son down, her green eyes piercing him.
Say something, damn it!
Rigian took a step forward, directly onto one of her new pups. Lavari bit his leg immediately so he'd back up, but it only took several heartbeats for him to step forward again, running a growl from the queen.
Admit it. You loved her more than me. That's why you let her go.
Lavari felt unease pull in her belly as she saw raw darkness fog over Rigian's eyes. She had seen it before, very rarely. Her son, her poor son. He was letting the madness consume him. She knew she was partially to blame, but how was she supposed to know Rigian only held Minnow to be her mate? She was completely unaware he believed in a formulaic life. You do all the right things, you get the things you want. Lavari had tried to convince him otherwise in his youth, and thought she did. But apparently she hadn't tried hard enough.
I hate you.
His voice dripped with venom as he walked off, his haunting blue eyes disappearing. Lavari took a brief moment to say goodbye to everything. She saw Alpha pacing back and forth behind his den, where he thought no one could see him. His eyes were clouded with madness too. What a shame. He had been very promising when the old Alpha died years ago and he took his place. Roxo was picking at his food while Petal tried to talk him into going on a hunt with her. Roxo's eyes were distant, but not clouded. He had settled down after his spat with Minnow, and now that she was gone, his flanks didn't bounce with the same energy when he walked. His eyes no longer had the fiery expression they once did. Her nephew had gone from a brash but capable young hunter to a quiet, nearly invisible pack member, sitting for long periods of time and contemplating while others around him celebrated life. Noxima was as irritable as ever, even going as far as to fight with Sabriz, one of her only true friends in the pack. The fact that Minnow's absence had affected the pack so much probably drove her fuming mad that the useless thing she birthed was somehow so important. Lavari looked around one last time before getting up and leaving. Her puppies whined and complained, but they would be fine. Or not. It didn't matter anymore. The weathered queen wandered the twisting path and over the vast hunting grounds, listening to every cry and feeling every twinge of pain from the forest. She accepted it fully. The whispers started to pick up as she approached the river. "Hi, sister," a little voice called out. Tila, she was here. It sounded like she was right next to her. Lavari couldn't help but smile warmly as she took a drink from the water. "Hi, Tila." Her voice had long gone dead, so all she could do was whisper as paw steps sounded behind her. As it did, she heard a whimper from her dead sister. "I'll be fine, Tila." Lavari looked out into the forest. She had carried its pain and secrets long enough. Her pack was already cursed, but she would increase it tenfold by doing nothing. "I'm sorry, Lavari." It was Hersha. "You didn't do anything wrong." Lavari purred. "I'm just happy it's all ending now." The paw steps, which had been approaching her in a zigzag, halted. "I know you're behind me, Rigian. I know what you plan to do. I won't fight it. Just know, this won't ever get rid of creatures like me or Minnow. We will always exist in this world, so long as it exists. The story of life always needs correction, and so we are always here."
Shut up!
Lavari felt the sharp fangs of her own flesh and blood dig into the back of her neck as she fell forward, being dangled off the edge of the river.
I don't care anymore. You're going to die, and I'm going to win.
"Oh, my dear son, you've already lost." Lavari's eyes closed. With that, Rigian closed her throat with his jaws, tearing through the flesh and gnashing his teeth together while thrashing her body about by her neck before letting go. She didn't make a sound. As she was falling, if there weren't holes in her neck and back, one would assume she was peacefully sleeping. Lavari's body fell limply into the river, quickly sinking under, but leaving behind a trail of red in the water as she flew down the stream. It was her turn to be free now. So that was Melting Skies, Chapter 8. I'll see you guys on the other side.